How's it going? Welcome back to another week of ProMAX Tech Talks. Here with the team again, we have Taylor, Mike, Brian, and Nathaniel. This week we're going to be talking about why you should consider either building your own server or why you should go to a vendor. Some considerations to think about with those and how you can go about building your own versus which vendors to look out for. So guys, why do people even consider building their own shared storage server in the first place? Like, what are the benefits? What are the negatives to that? Why do people go for a build their own instead of coming to a vendor?
Money. Like that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room, right? It's mostly, a cost savings thing. And look, a large portion of people that are in production now come from some level of computer technical background, when they were younger, and building a computer is not foreign to most of us. So stepping it into a server type system is not a crazy jump. It doesn't seem like a crazy jump, I'll put it like that, because there's a lot of considerations that you find yourself in when you're halfway through that you don't anticipate at the beginning. But yeah, mostly it's money, and it's I'll be generous. It's knowledge. Like, if you have the knowledge, you feel like you can do it yourself. And there's some truth to that, depending on what your needs are and how skilled you are, but it doesn't work for everybody.
Okay. So if someone
sorry to cut you off, because I think sometimes it's more than just money. I think budget is one of the biggest factors, because if you put it together yourself, you're going to save money. But I also think there's, a lot of people, especially if you're the IT guy at a company that has a video team, a lot of times it's the perception that this is your job, you have to be the one to put this together. But there's also just a fun aspect to it. It's really fun to order high-powered parts and put them together and make it all work.
Okay. So if someone were looking to go down the build your own route, like, where would they even get started? Like, where can they get these parts from? Are they readily available at like a Fry's or a Best Buy, or do they have to go look at somewhere difficult to find them?
So this goes back to like my answer for, I think, like half of these. It entirely depends on what they want to do with it and what their workflow actually needs. Depending on, like, if you just need a handful of drives or something, like, honestly, you can do it with a regular PC chassis. If you need something more than that, then you need a server chassis. Like, there's a million places to get them online. It just really comes down to what you need to do. There's everything from Amazon to Newegg, you can get it wherever you want. It's all the same stuff for the most part.
Okay. So when we were talking about why people take this approach to build their own, obviously the clear consensus here was cost. When you're comparing building your own to buying from a vendor, realistically, what kind of cost savings can someone expect to see from that?
Well, I'll jump in on that one. I think, it depends on what vendor you're buying from, right? Because if you have like a QNAP, Synology, you're probably gonna save 10-20%. If you get one of our systems, depending on what the software setup is, you might save about 20 to 30%. With a lot of the kind of traditional video shared storage solutions, those are usually like 2 to 3 times more expensive than building your own, sometimes more than that. So, if you gave me a budget of $10,000 and I was building something myself, I'd probably be able to build over 100 terabyte server from scratch. If you buy that same thing from ProMAX, without, the MAM and all the extra software stuff, just basic shared storage, you might be in a 13-ish grand range. A traditional shared storage vendor for video teams, you'd probably be looking at 35-40 grand.
There's a couple levels to this though too. You're saving money on the physical build, and when you buy from a vendor, there's a lot more that comes with it than just the physical build. Now, some vendors, you are literally paying them to turn screws, and that's where you're probably not saving a huge amount over those guys. They're handing you a box and they're washing their hands of it and they're saying good luck. And that's fine. Then the support and everything is on you. Other vendors like us, there's obviously support that's involved in it, video specific support for your workflows, and the traditional vendors kind of fall into that category as well. So there's some other costs there that are a lot more than just slapping parts together and turning screws. It's hard to quantify when you build it yourself, because what's your time worth? Because if supporting that system, if you're going to calculate that over the next 5 years, you might not be saving that much.
Okay, that actually leads perfectly into what the next question was going to be. So obviously it's one of those things, like when you save money on doing something yourself, there's going to be those extra costs, those drawbacks, those negatives. Besides like the support side that we just touched on, are there any other drawbacks or negative things that people should be looking out for when they're building one of these? Like, hey, this is something you're going to run into, so they can kind of cut that off before it happens? Or is it just something that everyone's just kind of getting beat up with as they're building it out?
Taylor, can you speak to like the trials and tribulations of compatibility?
For an absolutely indefinite amount of time. So pretty much with any hardware you buy, whatever software you're thinking of using to run on that hardware, you're going to hit somewhere along the way. You're going to open up that chassis you bought to put all your stuff in, and you're going to look at the power supply cabling, and you're going to be like, oh, I'm missing a cable, or I'm missing an adapter, or I need I need to buy an entirely new container for this because I physically put it in and there's just like a tiny little bit of clearance that doesn't fit there. So there is so many aspects of building a system where not everything is built to put everything else into it. So you're going to get chassis that can't support certain graphics cards. You're going to get RAID controllers that have, power plugs on some part that ends up hitting the roof and you can't close the lid, and then you're just stuck with a open kind of dangling there at an angle setup that doesn't look good and probably doesn't have proper airflow anymore. So everything, there's a lot more to consider than just, oh, these are the parts that I need to meet the specification requirements for my build. There's also like, hey, how do you physically put that together? And then you plug it all in, power on the software side, and it's like, oh, I need drivers, and that gets into a whole nother ballgame there. So there's going to be a number of things you're going to find along the way that aren't going to work seamlessly.
Okay. Do you have any like real life nightmare stories of things you've seen like that?
About half of the examples he just used.
Yeah, all of them have happened multiple times, personal experience.
I would say probably, for every product we put out, it's probably the 10th version of what we intended for that product. Like, we always run into so many levels of that should work on paper, and then we put it together and it doesn't work.
Yeah. We've even run into things that should work that just don't, for no logical reason, and we just move on to another part and check that box and make sure everything is good. But it's incredibly difficult to a desktop workstation, a gaming computer, something like that everybody's kind of used to building. You can generally pull parts off the shelf and throw them together, and you've got a pretty reasonable chance of success. When you get into some of the more specialized hardware, ingest hardware, RAID cards, stuff like that, it's a lot more, it's a lot less tolerance that goes into it. So you've got to be prepared for that.
Okay. And then, so when someone's building this out, since they're doing it all themselves, they're not bringing anyone else in, are there any like performance ceilings that people who build their own are going to hit compared to going out and buying a system from a vendor who's been doing this for years? Or can they actually hit the same type of performance specs that they can expect to buy from a vendor?
It's a matter of knowledge and time. I mean, the tools, the unique thing about computers in general, like these systems, most of the capabilities are in our hands. It depends on if you have the skill and knowledge to bring them out. And if you know how to configure the system properly and you've spent the time, there's a reasonable chance of that. If you're a network engineer and you know how it works, you're probably going to do okay. Now, if you hopefully you're a network engineer and a storage expert and a few other, like if there's ingest going on and a few other things, there's some things to consider there. But you can knock your part out of the park and do pretty well. The trick is getting it all in one place and being able to account for all of it. And it's not a small amount of stuff.
Yeah, and I think, from speaking to my time here at ProMAX and my time at S&S, I was there for 9 years. I've been here for almost 10 years now. I can attest for both of our companies, like there's legitimate software development in tuning for video applications, and that does help. I would say that matters a lot less now than it did 5 years ago. Because you get, 12G SAS, you get SATA, SSDs, and, a little bit of tuning knowledge, SSDs, a good RAID controller will get you a lot further than it did 5 years ago. That tuning that we've done, it still helps, but you can get a lot further now than you used to be able to. If we were having this conversation 5 years ago, I would say you were nuts if you tried to build this on your own.
There's still that one setting that you literally can switch, and it's like, oh, I just lost 60% of my read performance though. So those things still exist, absolutely. If you don't have the knowledge and you aren't tuning it properly, there's a couple little tricks that can catch you and slow you down heavily.
Well, that part of the problem is finding that one setting can take one person 40 hours.
Oh yeah.
Well, and that one setting is specific to a particular piece of hardware that, and if you switch that hardware, there's probably another setting that you've got to learn and figure out. And it's, to get it all dialed in, it takes some time.
Okay. So obviously if someone goes through a vendor like us, we're going to provide our software that comes with the server. What can someone who builds their own, like what kind of software do they have available to them for asset management or any of the basic things that they're going to be doing with this server? Are there general software out there that anyone can just purchase, or what are their options?
Well, their general options right off the bat is just, you have to select an OS. Are you going to run on Linux? Are you going to run on Windows? If you're going to, there's some built-in functionality for file sharing and such that you can leverage. None of it is terribly intuitive. God forbid you ask your editors to learn it, because they will ruin you. But there's most of the proprietary software that companies like us have is to facilitate an easy connection and to kind of take the complexity out of it, so that those editors can actually just go to work. The editors don't want to deal with IP addresses. They don't want to deal with, SMB and NFS and all those other connection protocols. They literally do not care what it means, and they shouldn't have to. But it's up to you how you want to play that. You can do all the connections and everything manually through any of the base OSs, but that's the easiest way to do it, or at least that's the way to do it without spending additional money if you're building it yourself.
Okay. So going back to when we talked about vendor versus building your own, that there's that support there with going through a vendor versus building it your own. Say I built my own server and it just dies on me. Like, what are there people out there you can go to for this, or you just have to have all that knowledge to fix that internally? And how, if you do have to go outside to some third party to come in and support your system, what kind of cost can you expect to have come with that?
There's a lot of questions there. I think the single biggest thing, is the one throat to choke type situation. Like, if you build a server and you put in 4 or 5 different manufacturers worth of parts, if any one of those goes bad, you're dealing with a different, replacement process for each one of those parts potentially. They have different time frames, different commitments. Some parts might be in warranty, some might not. You have to keep track of all that, and you have to manage that. And you have to manage your own spares if you need to. Through vendors, usually it goes back to the one throat to choke thing. They're going to support their box. If you have a NIC card that dies or a RAID card that dies, you're generally going to be able to get that replacement rather quickly, or in a lot of cases, even the hard drives, if they were purchased through the vendor. So that cuts down on your your touch time on the system significantly. It goes back to that concept of, if you build your own system, how much is your own time worth? Because over the next 5 years, how much time are you going to spend troubleshooting and dealing with it? So, yeah. Mike, can you speak to the RMA side of the world at all?
Yeah, components fail all the time. Parts come and go. I mean, it's easier to go through a single vendor rather than just multiple, because once you have so many different parts, you have so many different people to talk to and get sometimes thrown in different circles. When I get RMA, it's just me.
Well, and I think part of the problem when you get into the RMA process and when you're building your own is it's not always obvious what part has failed. And when that happens, when you have multiple vendors, you just wind up, as sure as the sun rises, you wind up with one vendor saying, well, we've never seen this. I think it's this other part's problem.
Yeah. And
you get this feedback loop of nothing happening.
And there's two other factors here too. One, a vendor who deals with these systems all the time, Mike and Taylor here can basically hear a problem described, and they probably have a short list of 2 or 3 things that cause that problem. That might take somebody who's built the system themselves and doesn't have the breadth of experience with a system like that. It might take you weeks to figure that out. So that's a huge consideration. The other thing too is, just from an RMA perspective, we deal with these companies all the time. As a vendor, we have relationships that a single user would never have, and we can sometimes leverage that to our users' advantage. If we need to get a part faster than normal, we know who to call, and the other vendors probably do too. It's just the way of doing business, but that's just that's a benefit that you simply won't have access to building it yourself.
Okay. And then to wrap this up, so say someone calls in, you pick up the phone, and they're like, "Hey, I'm hell bent on building my own server." What would be the one piece of advice you would give them before they hung up the phone? In regards to building it, what they need to consider outside of just the server they're building, anything that is involved with that.
What's your tolerance for failure? Like, does it need to be up 100% of the time? Does it need to be up 99% of the time? There's a pretty big difference there when it comes to choosing your parts and what you're doing. The other side of it is, support costs and stuff, and support factors. Like, if you're going to build it yourself and you have a 100% uptime requirement, like, how are you going to do that? That'd be one question. It's certainly, it's really difficult to narrow down one, but that's pretty high on the list.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think similar, I would push on, do you really want to be the last person in line responsible for this? Because that's what a lot of it's about. If you actually want to do that and want to sign up for it, then absolutely make sure you go SSD on the storage side.
Yeah, go with the most reliable thing you can find.
How much time do you have on your hands? You're going to be spending a lot of it just keeping that thing running.
Even a lot of time just doing the research and what you need it for and what you need to build. Otherwise, you're going to do a lot of trial and error with parts.
Yeah, and I'll even note it's interesting to go back to your software question earlier, Matt. We've actually talked about and considered releasing our software as build your own system and buy the platform software and install it. But every time we've taken a real look at that, it's pretty impossible for us to be able to support those clients and to support the variety of different types of builds. Like, that's something that like we literally don't go towards that revenue. Like we walk away from revenue because we're like, no, that looks ugly. And there's a reason we won't do that. And the reason is not to protect our server sales. It's really not. We would sell more doing it that way.
Okay. Anything else on that, or?
I guess the only thing I'll say is if you have the knowledge, it's a fun conundrum, because if you have the knowledge to build a storage server, you probably know better than to build it yourself in the first place. Like if you truly understand what's going into all of this and what it takes to manage it and QC it and make sure everything is good, you know what that really is. And there is value there from vendors to do this stuff. We wouldn't exist if there wasn't, and it is an easy, if you're a techie guy, and to Nathaniel's point, you got the opportunity to order a lot of really cool stuff and fast SSDs. It's a hard thing to deny, but just think it through, because it's not a small operation when you really get down into it.
All right, anyone else? Or all right, well, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of a ProMAX Tech Talks. If you're not already, follow us on our social media channels below and subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions, feel free to send them in and we'll try to answer them on one of our next talks. Thanks everyone. Have a great Thanksgiving.